Hello. I wanted to give everybody the chance just to kind of go along with me on this study that I just took. About once a week, easily, I do a study that is rather mind blowing. And so I wanted to certainly just start kind of a new segment. Really pray for me, make sure I can get this out there and do so on a weekly basis. But I want to set out something called the Weekly Wow. This is going to be a segment that I'm going to release here as often as I can. Of course, weekly being the goal here. And I just want to share with you the kinds of things that I find. I already have a few actually backed up that I've never gotten a chance to record. So I'm pulling up my screen recording because I'm in the midst of this study myself and it is too cool. So if you're the kind of person who is curious about whether there is historical evidence for the biblical accounts, um, and you don't have a lot of time to read through these old books, things called the Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage, that, frankly, as you're going to see going on, has tons of Egyptian hieroglyphs in it that it's translating, and we'll throw in, German and Greek for clarification. So, what I'm going to do, I did take the time to read through it, and it's really, really fascinating, you guys. I can't even tell you. It's amazing. I do actually encourage you to go and find this. I'm going to put the link for this PDF that I found in the comments and just give you an opportunity to go through it yourself. It's too cool. But it does take time, and it is pretty difficult to read through if you don't really know how to read commentaries on language like this. So, join with me on this journey. We're just going to take it together. So I'm going to back up real quick because one of the things that I want to point out here is I kind of got stuck on this because of the documentary Patterns of Evidence. If you're not familiar with this, you really should be. It's fantastic, and it shows the evidence of different accounts of the Hebrew people within the land of Egypt during the time, well, now I already have to put a little caveat in there. Timing is what it's all about. Timing is what is under such hot debate and is so highly contested amongst scholarly resources. And within the documentary, where all of the evidence is meant to present basically what is an alternate timeline to what common chronology accepts. Most of the Egyptologists and grander scholars would put the biblical account of the Exodus in the period of Ramses II, which, let's be fair, is what the Exodus says. However, it's not actually well, some people think that implies that those events happened at that time, but if it was recorded nearer that time and happened, oh, I don't know, 400 years earlier, um, we actually start to see quite a bit of historical evidence for which the historians say there is none because they're looking in the wrong period of time. I won't be the one to prove this to you. Go watch Patterns of Evidence. It's fantastic, and that's what got me turned on to this. So, there is a reference within the documentary to the admonitions of an Egyptian sage. And this is a text that has been dated. One of the things you're going to see here, if you go and you find it here on Wikipedia, it's called the Ipuwer Papyrus. And it comes from this document that has been compiled. It's a papyrus that has been dated to the mid-century, so no later than the 12th dynasty in Egypt. In order to understand that, you do have to go around a little bit here. It's in the Middle Kingdom that you can see in that pop-up that comes here. The Middle Kingdom is the point where it was basically the height of the Egyptian pharaohs and awesome things happening at that point. Now, what's going to happen eventually, of course, is that there is going to be a fall of Egypt. It's no longer a golden period, and something really, really terrible happens. And it would seem that the Ipuwer Papyrus is what details that situation. So, what we're going to get back to here is the papyrus itself as we read through it. And I'm going to pull out a couple of these things. Look, I am not an expert. I just kind of happened to find this thing and read it for myself. So that's all I'm going to do for you is point out the things that I read, thought were really interesting. And I am not going to do a whole lot of commentary other than that. I encourage you to do your own research. Happily go read the people who say, nope, this isn't it. This is not an account of the Egyptian plagues. However, I think that there's something pretty fascinating here, and in order to put this one in the Middle Kingdom, as the papyrus itself is dated, to have anything to do with the Egyptian people, you do need to be willing to accept the shifted dating as it's laid out in Patterns of Evidence. So if you're not familiar with that, I would say go check that out first, because it's going to be a pretty important prerequisite to accepting this document as actually being anything relevant to the biblical Exodus. So what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I'm just going to jump right back down, and it's going to take the document a second, so please bear with me. Oh, yay, it went pretty quickly. So we're going to go to page 20 of this thing. If you choose to follow along, want to go find it, of course, it's all going to be a little bit jumpy. So what you'll see here is that in italics, for the most part, are the actual words written on the papyrus that are presented. And you're going to start to see as we keep going here that there are, oh, there they are, Egyptian hieroglyphs. And that's what they're translating, and that's what they're bringing out here. So let's jump through a couple of these passages that I've already read through and pulled out. So I'm just kind of finding my favorite selections. If you want to go find your own, please do, because I guarantee you're going to find something interesting, though you'll probably come across the same sorts of favorites that I did. So the first thing we have here on page 20. Come, predestined for you in the time of Horus, in the age of the Ennead, the virtuous man walks in mourning, mourning, on account of that which has happened in the land. The tribes of the desert have become Egyptians everywhere. Now, of course, as you read this and we go through it, you're going to see that these dots are big steps within the hieroglyphs where the papyrus was damaged, something happened, they don't precisely know what's going on. So you're going to see a couple of these big gaps where it's not fully translated because there's only so much that can be done with ancient documents. So kind of interesting. Of course, this is the selection from the text that is being this is the selection from the text being translated right here, and then this is the commentary. And you're going to see as we go along that some of these, these things which are in brackets are implicated by the context of what's going on. These things which are parenthesis question marks are the things that mostly the commentator is going to expound upon down here in the notes. And later on, you'll see some that have double question marks, where even the commentator doesn't seem to know what's going on. But we'll see. So, as we go through, the man of character, the virtuous man, interesting, don't quite know who this person is. The phrases show that it is no merely local disturbance, that it is here described, but a great and overwhelming national disaster. And yes, we're going to see that go through quite heavily. The whole nation of Egypt is being downtrodden in what is being detailed in this text. So, as we keep going forward here, you're going to see true Egyptians are nowhere to be found. They conversely have become foreigners. Egyptians, real men, in distinction to barbarians. So Egyptian has fallen prey to invaders, and they've taken so firm a root in the land that they may be said to have become Egyptians. Interesting. So we all know, I mean, I would hope so. Let's take a minute to go read it again if you need to as we go through this. But of course, there was an influx of Semitic people of the land, those who dwelt in the land of Canaan at the time, into the land of Egypt, into the land of Goshen, which was northeastern. And we're going to see that again here in this document. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But we do have an influx of the Semitic people coming through into the land of Goshen as far as the biblical text is concerned. Forsooth, the face is pale, which the ancestors had foretold. Interesting. So that's something probably worth noting as we go forward. You're going to see some of these occurrences, especially it does use the occasion to reference the Egyptians as Negroes. So these that the face is pale, they actually seem to be referring to an outside people group with a different sort of complexion. So going forward, down into page 24, again, you can see there's a lot of commentary. If you want to go read this yourself, have at it. Whoops. Okay. Once we get into page 24, forsooth, the face is pale, the bowman is ready, the wrongdoer is everywhere, there is no man of yesterday. Not entirely sure what that means. I don't think, any of us are really sure, but this is kind of the sort of dating that they have for the Middle Kingdom. You'll notice right here that it is the word that's being used as the usual phrase for bowman during this time. Some of the dating of this document comes very much down to the grammar that's being used. So that's why it's being examined in this way so carefully. So we're going to keep going down here. All of these, again, very interesting. I would recommend reading through them, but there are a couple we're going to highlight. Forsooth, poor men are become owners of good things. He who could make for himself no sandals is now the possessor of riches. Something you're going to see going forward here is that, especially if you watch it in the documentary, the occurrences of the slaves doing so well at this time in the midst of political turmoil is something where they say, oh no, it's obviously just an idiom, and it's just poetic, it can't be literal, because how could the slaves be doing so well when the whole nation is falling apart? How indeed. Now 27, page 27, we're here. This is going to be the most compelling, outstanding one of all. This is the notation that everybody finds, and the reason we're talking about this document in the first place. Forsooth, the river is blood, and yet men drink of it. Men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water. Shrink from tasting human beings. No kidding. And thirst for water. The idea that when the river was turned to blood in the Exodus story, all water was turned to blood in Egypt. Every pool, every basin, every puddle, everything was turned to blood. There was no water. So, yeah, they had to drink it. Okay, so while that is a big bing, 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 bing that a lot of people point to, and the reason the documentary brings it up at all, we're going to keep moving because there's still a lot more really interesting stuff. So we're going to keep going down to page 30. And we got to jump down a little bit farther here. Again, you can see all this really fun stuff to read through. Here we go. Now, again, a lot of people are going to read this poetically. Fair. It seems rather poetic, and it even seems kind of prophetic. What I find here, though, is if you read this literally, think about this differently. Forsooth, men are few. He who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. When the officiants have spoken, he flees without delay. Men are few. Is that literal? He who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. For there was not a household in Egypt where there was not a firstborn slain. When the officiants have spoken, he flees without delay. Let my people go, perhaps. Something to think about. I will point out to you here as we go forward, just even as we're going to pull in a little bit of the commentary here, we're not going to completely leave out the scholarly endeavor that's been taking place in this this publication. Possibly here the officiants at the funeral ceremony, the proposed restoration is somewhat too long, a defect that might be remedied by the omission of this character. Now, what I do find interesting here is that the commentator seems to be implying that when the officiants have spoken, he flees without delay. This proposed restoration, I think that's more of a grammatical term, is somewhat too long. So he's saying that this translation, even that he's pulling out, doesn't seem to make sense unless you omit this character here. I don't precisely know what that means, but something probably to take into consideration. So let's move on to page 35. And here there are lots and lots of accounts all in between talking about the switch of power, how the slaves are being risen up in power and the noble people are having trouble doing anything, really. This one's interesting and made me laugh. Forsooth, all dead are like those who live. Double question mark. Those who were Egyptians have become foreigners. Well, now, that's interesting because we do know that there was a mixed multitude that left Egypt. Now, of course, the commentator says hopelessly obscure. Apparently, there's another text where somewhere it implies, suggested, the man of importance, that we're coming back to this figure. It is the Seth suggestion, RMT, the remit probably, no vowels are given, so I'm sorry for these pronunciations, as above in 1:9 and 3:2. The last phrase is quite untranslatable. Elsewhere, and we're throwing in some interesting notations here, to place someone on the way, to direct, or to guide. Forsooth, all are dead like those who live. All dead are like those who live. Those who were Egyptians have become foreigners. The man of importance, directing or guiding those who are no longer dead but are now alive, perhaps. So, we'll move on then to the notation here. On page 36. Oh, this is where it gets a little rough. Forsooth, the children of princes are dashed against the walls. The offspring of desire are laid out on the high ground. Khnum groans because of his weariness. Now, this is where we're going to turn to the commentary again. It's saying that there's a word here that could mean neck, but that would be meaningless here. So it's rejected in favor of this other translation, which seems to be in the sense of to pray for, wish for children. So the offspring of desire, the offspring of those who are wished for, the desired children are laid out on the high ground. We're going to see that come up a little bit here. Khnum groans because of his weariness. The sense must be, Khnum groans over his wearying exertions in creating children who are doomed to perish at once. For Khnum, as creator of mankind. Now, there is a note here that says see Imit, C3:14 note, and that word there that is groaning over his weariness is otherwise translated as groaning or grief. So there is a creator of mankind who is grieving because they're disappearing immediately as children. So, let's keep going. We're going to move down to page 42. Just going to take us a little ways down here. One more. Forsooth, the hot-headed, get that back. Come on. Forsooth, the hot-headed man says, if I knew where God is, then I would make offerings unto him. Interesting. Forsooth, all animals, their hearts weep. Cattle moan because of the state of the land, just showing the utter desolation of what is coming through here. Forsooth, terror slays. The timid man says, your enemies few are. Is it by following the crocodile and cleaving it asunder? Is it by slaughtering the lion roasted on the fire? Is it sprinkling Ptah? Wherefore that you give to him? It does not reach him. It is misery that you give to him. Very interesting kind of ideas going on in here, but it seems that there is, the timid man says, there is just, I don't know, what stands out to me in this passage is, of course, throughout all of this text, there is kind of this humbling going on, where the prideful are knocked down, and the lowly are raised up. So we're going to move on to page 46. Forsooth, grain has perished on every side. People are stripped of clothes, spices, and oil. Everybody says there is none. The storehouse is ruined. Its keeper is stretched on the ground. It is no happy thing for my heart. Would that I had made my voice heard at that moment, that it might save me from the pain in which I am. We know that there was plundering going on quite voluntarily, as far as the biblical text implies that the Egyptians were saying, please go, take it, get out of here. That the storehouses, the clothing, the spices, the oil, that everything has been taken by plunderers, as we're actually going to see that being laid out here eventually. It is no happy thing for my heart. Would that I had made my voice heard at that moment, that it might save me from the pain in which I am. There's a repentance idea going on here. Very interesting. Now we're going to go all the way down to page 53. We're going to hope the document works with me on this one. All right, so on page 53, I'll go ahead and give you, because I've got side notes here as we get there, and especially as I go forward with it. Don't want to skip over. There we are, right at the bottom here. Behold, things are done that have never happened for a long time past. The king has been taken away by poor men. Behold, he who was buried as a hawk is what the pyramid concealed is become empty. So they're referring to grave robbing. Something interesting that the commentator points out here is that this passage is referring to the robbery of royal tombs. It is the earliest known allusion to this theme, of which the later history of Egypt has so much to tell. See the interesting account given in the introductory chapter of Newbery and Spielberg's excavations in the Theban necropolis. So what we're going to see then is that this is one of those points where apparently this has never happened before. No one raids the tombs of kings. Now, of course, we know that tomb raiding of the kings of Egypt became a common practice after a while, but look at this. We know from the account that they took the bones of Joseph with them. And again, if you want to go watch Patterns of Evidence, there might be a tomb of Joseph that actually had a pyramid over it. That he was considered high enough as a king. He was appointed to Pharaoh's right-hand man. Now, we can go through that history too at a later time. There's a lot more to explore there, but there's something to be said, interestingly, of those who are leaving at this time are apparently taking those who are under the sepulcher. What the pyramid concealed is become empty. The grave, the tomb, they're taking that away. On page 54. Okay, that was the second part of that. We needed to move on with it. So, page 55. Behold, Egypt has come to pour out water. He who poured water on the ground, he has captured the strong man in misery. Now, that's an interesting one, I think, because even for, if, of course, chronologically, if we get into this, it gets a little bit touchy. But for the water that was poured out in Egypt with the Nile, that if in some way this is referring to Moses, behold, Egypt has come to pour out water. He who poured out water on the ground, he has captured the strong man in his misery. Now, the idea back here is that to pour out water is as an offering. So this may have been regarded as a servile action, says the commentary here. So that's interesting enough. However, if we actually go to Exodus 4, specifically Exodus 4:9, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take the water of the river and pour it upon the dry land, and the water which thou takest out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land. He who poured out water on the ground, he has captured the strong man in misery. Behold, the serpent is taken from its hole. The secret of the kings of the upper and lower Egypt are divulged. We know that there was a serpent that showed up, and we know that Moses used it to prove to these Egyptians things that they hadn't known before or wouldn't admit. All right, bear with me here because we're going to go all the way down to page 71. And the interesting thing is, as we go here, you're going to see that every single one of these pages are just watching the flip of the servitude versus those who were ruling in Egypt. All of it is just being turned completely on its head. There is an absolute 100% upheaval of order in Egypt during this time. Behold, noble ladies flee. Their children, the overseers, come over them. Behold, he who had no dependence is now a lord of serfs. So, moving on to page 71 here. We're getting into the big chunks. Okay. Destroyed are, their food is taken away from them, the messenger without time. He is seized, laden with his possessions, taken away. Men pass by his door, chambers, with hawks, mourn. Is the poor man vigilant? The day dawns upon him without his dreading. Men flee. Tents are what they make, like dwellers of the hills. Oh, but to read this with a Hebrew mind. Okay, so destroyed are, their food is taken away from them. Though fear of the terror he inspires, the poor man begs. Again, we've got this flipping. The messenger without time, he is seized. The messenger. without. Now, of course, we have this gap here. It's not necessarily without time, but the messenger without, outside. And then we have time, something temporal. He is seized. Who? We don't know exactly. The poor man? Maybe the messenger? Not sure. He is seized, laden with his possessions. Huh. Okay, that could be the rich man being robbed. We're not sure. Taken away. Kind of makes sense. Men pass by his door. Okay, interesting. Now we do actually come back to this idiom here, chambers with hawks. He who's been laid out by like a hawk. That was that in Egyptian lore that seemed to be more of being raised up like Ra, and in death being carried up like a hawk. So that seems to be where they're talking about the dead. Now it's not talking about mourn here, like mourn, like in mourning, I assume. Is the poor man vigilant? The poor man begs. We've got the poor man popping up twice here. Is the poor man vigilant? The day dawns upon him without his dreading it. Well, that's a good question then. Is the poor man vigilant? Is he looking out? Well, the day dawns upon him without his dreading it. Let's back up here. Let's keep some context for this. Destroyed are their food is taken away from them. Who? The poor man? I don't think so. He seems pretty well taken care of here. Through fear of the terror he inspires, the messenger without time, he is seized, laden with his possessions taken away. Men pass by his door. Chambers with hawks. Mourn. In the morning when the sun rises, those who are watching for it, men flee. This is the kicker for me. Tents are what they make, like dwellers of the hills. Now this one, lastly, if the meaning, IMW, this word here, be correct, the Egyptians are described as reduced to making tents for themselves like the barbarians of the deserts. Interesting. Okay, barbarians really just referring to those who are outside and not part of the actual, inward culture. But we do know that certain groups of these who, even by the account of this papyrus that we saw in the beginning, that the foreigners who were coming in and the initial influx of people making themselves like the Egyptians, and then the Egyptians actually left, made themselves like the foreigners, and now apparently they're going out to dwell in tents. Interesting. So, destroyed is the performance of that for which they are sent by servants in the missions of their lords, without their being afraid of them. Behold, they are 5 men. They say, Go ye upon the road which ye know of. We are come. I'll tell you what, even in my context, I'm not really sure, but there are a couple things I can guess. I'm no scholar in this, but it stood out to me. Destroyed is the performance of that for which they are sent by servants in the missions of their lords. Now, okay, let's assume that this is a context that could be talking about the servants, since they're actually gaining power now somehow. That they're no longer afraid of their lords. So their service is destroyed, the performance of that for which they are sent. But by servants, sent by servants in the missions of their Lord, without their being afraid of them. Behold, they are 5 men. Who? What? The context in here is very weird. The first sentence is exceedingly clumsy, as it says. No kidding. Well, the latter part of the paragraph is obscure, but the meaning must be that the servants now give orders to their masters, says the commentator. Very interesting. Where it has been translated, a party of 5 servants. However, it is to be noted that this notation here in the Old Kingdom is applied to women only, and it is uncertain how much importance should be attached to the determinative in the Benahazan title. Interesting. So there is a title being given here of 5 servants. Now, the thing that jumps out to me, destroyed is the performance of that for which they are sent by servants in the missions of their lords, without their being afraid of them. Behold, they are 5 men. Do we have 5 servants in the Exodus story? I don't know. Of course, we have Moses. We do have Aaron, and Aaron had 3 sons. That's just what jumps to my head immediately. Not going to hang my hat on it. All told, something interesting just to point out, I thought. So, we're almost done here, guys. I just wanted to point out here that in page 78 of this text, come back. We got this big old chunk of, even in my own notes, I just put, what? This is fantastic, and I thought this was pretty amazing. So we're going to close it out here because this is when it starts to get good. Okay, so a lack of people. Ra, I think, is what this is. Command the west to diminish by the gods. Behold, ye, wherefore does he seek to fashion mankind, without distinguishing the timid man from him whose nature is violent? He bringeth coolness upon that which is hot. It is said, he is the herdsman of mankind. No evil is in his heart. When his herds are few, he passes the day to gather them together, their hearts being on fire. Would that he had perceived their nature in the first generation of men, then he would have repressed evils. He would have stretched forth his arm against it. He would have destroyed their seed and their inheritance. Men desired to give birth. Sadness grew up, needy people on every side. Thus it was, and it passes not away, so long as the gods in the midst thereof endure. Seed shall come forth from the women of the people. None is found on the way. A fighter goes forth that he may destroy the wrongs that they have brought about. There is no pilot in their moment. Where is he today? Is he sleeping? Behold, his might is not seen. Selah. I really do. I need to let that sink in for a minute. Behold, ye, wherefore does he seek to fashion mankind? Why, basically, is what wherefore. Why did he make man? Without distinguishing the timid man from those whose nature is violent. Now, of course, this is speaking of Ra, and we'll let that ride for what it is. He bringeth coolness upon that which is hot. It is said, he is the herdsman of mankind. Interesting. No evil is in his heart. I'm not sure that's true for Ra, even in Egyptian lore. When his herds are few, he passes the day to gather them together, their hearts being on fire. Would that he perceived their nature in the first generation of men. Oh, if only he had seen how evil man was going to be, he might have cut it off completely. Would have destroyed their seed and their inheritance. Men desired to give birth. Interesting. Sadness grew up, needy people on every side. Thus it was, and it passes not away. So poor have always been with us, and they always will be. I think we've seen that somewhere else. The poor will always be among you. So long as the gods in the midst thereof endure, seed shall come forth from the woman of the people. Women of the people, excuse me. None is found in the way. A fighter goes forth. That he may destroy the wrongs that they have brought about. Who? Mankind? There is no pilot in their moment. Where is he today? Is he sleeping? Behold, his might is not seen. Interesting. Again, I'm not going to commentate too much. I can't. But we're going to move down into their commentary a little bit here. And I do actually want to point out to you The theory put forward by Lang with regard to this passage has been criticized at some length in the introduction, page 13 through 15, and though a few references to his view will be inevitable in commenting on the text, it seems superfluous to cover the same ground over again. It will suffice to remind the reader that Lang thought it possible here to discern a messianic prophecy, which is thus described by him. Der Prophet, I'm not even gonna try. Yeah, that's so he stays in the German. Now, that's another commentator on the same text that this commentator here is expositing on. You can read more of that in the introduction on this specific book, again, linked in the video description. So we're gonna bump way down here. If you want to read all the commentary on that, I say go ahead. It goes on for 6 pages, and it is not an easy read. I'm just warning you now. So, once we keep going here, we're just going to jump all the way down. And I'm going to scroll through these and keep talking. Page 92 says, what Ipuwer said when he answered the majesty of the sovereign, ... all cattle, to be ignorant of it is what is pleasant in their hearts. Thou hast done what is done what is good in their hearts. Excuse me. Thou hast nourished people with it. They cover their ... through fear of the morrow. The important one in this is the commentary because, well, it makes very little sense to us just at a first read through, really. Ipuwer is the one, of course, we're seeing with the Ipuwer Papyrus. That's what it's called. We're seeing him as being the person who is the writer of the document, talking to the king, it seems. And something that is pointed out by the commentator that's interesting. Concluding the words of Ipuwer, if such they be, are by no means so clear as we could wish. The Egyptians are apparently likened to cattle for whom ignorance is bliss. The sage now turns to the king. Thou hast done what is good in their hearts, thou hast nourished them with it. These words can hardly be understood otherwise than ironically. The king has fostered the Egyptians in their lack of knowledge, so that they go their ways heedless even of their own misery, and without will or intelligence to better their condition. The last sentence may perhaps be guessed to mean they veil their faces because of the fear of tomorrow. That is, they fear the look of the future in the face. They look the fear of future in the face. At all events, the phrase fear of tomorrow touches the keynote of the book and may very appropriately be its last utterance. Today sorrow is everywhere. Unless people mend their ways, what hope can they have for tomorrow? Well, now, so let's go ahead to the actual last word of the phrase. That isn't technically where it concluded and actually gets a little weirder from here. But it is to be an aged man who has not yet died, and his son is young and without understanding. He begins. He does not open his mouth to speak to you. Ye seize him in the fate of death. Weep. Go. After you, the earth is on every side. If men call to, weep. There. Enter into the sepulchres, burn the statues, the corpses of the mummy of directing work. Okay. So, while that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, we're going to read just this little bit here of the commentary together. Here, however, if they looked upon as the continuation of the speech of Ipuwer, they can only be accounted for by supposing them to contain a description of the king as aged and incompetent, while his son is still a babe, unable to take the place of his father. The extreme improbability of this view can be easily shown. Ipuwer has, we must remember, begun to answer the king, whom he directly addresses in the second person singular, while the Egyptians at large are referred to by the pronoun of the third person plural. At this point intervenes the supposed description of the king, without any preliminary word of warning, and from the following line onwards, the audience is addressed in the second person plural. The abruptness of this change of attitude is, to my mind, quite intolerable, even when liberal allowances have made for the greater freedom of Egyptian idiom in its use of pronouns. Now, basically, what he's saying is that it changes pronouns. It changes talking about the people, then talking to the king in a very informal way, which probably isn't something that would have happened. So it's hard to say who is really the subject of the sentence here, assuming that Ipuwer is addressing the majesty of the sovereign, that for him to use the second person plural like he does to refer to the pharaoh doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So for this papyrus to be part of antiquity, set within the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, something that is going to have to be noted here, and I'm just going to go through this really quickly. You're going to, again, have to look this up on your own. The Middle Kingdom, as described in the documentary, the patterns of evidence, patterns of evidence in the Exodus. You'll see this documentary. It's really, really good. And what it's going to describe then is the movement of the dating of the Israelites within Egypt, so as to actually kind of confront some of these evidences that we're finding that seem to speak of a Semitic people at that time. There is a distinct rise in the golden era of the Middle Kingdom within this time period, within the gap of about 1700, 1600, 1500 BC. There's, you can see in these couple of hundred of years that things are happening here. Now, there is a distinct rise and a distinct fall. The distinct fall, interestingly enough, is concluded, more or less, well, capstoned, I should say, maybe, with the rise of Egypt's first female pharaoh. So much so they didn't even have a term for a female pharaoh in their language. It was such a foreign concept they didn't even think to speak of it. So it was obviously a decision made out of desperation. And I would encourage you all to go look into that. Even where it's talking about some of the peoples of the Asiatic people here in this document, I did find a citation in the book, The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt by Toby Wilkinson, sorry, Toby, that there is a reference. Close ties between the Egyptians and their Asian neighbors were also maintained in the Sinai Peninsula, where the local Palestinian rulers provided logistical support to the Egyptian mining expeditions. So, in other words, local Palestinian, read Israel, that these people were allowing mining operations from the Egyptians at a time that was occurring very early on, far earlier than what this document is describing, probably near to the time of Joseph, talking about Asiatics coming into Egypt, especially into the northeastern delta. And that, as we know, is the land of Goshen. So when we see this huge influx of people, you're going to see Semitic-speaking Asiatics from the Sinai with their experience in the desert travel. Again, this is quote from Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt. The steady buildup of Asiatic population in the Nile Valley and the Delta would soon make itself felt in other ways as well, with the disastrous consequences for Egypt. I would encourage you to seek this out. It's really, really, really fascinating, and if you're willing to accept some alternate dating, you might actually find something, well, you might find some evidence of the Exodus in Egypt.